Hey, Average Joes, real quick. We had some technical difficulties this week, so we will not be covering the ECQ or the ETS results like we had planned. We lost all of that as we were going into the third topic, so we're just going to go right into the third topic after we talk about our weeks and Eternal, and then we'll move on to our deck list of the week and Brewski, and then sign off. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we recorded 1 and 2 and all the beginning stuff, but we lost it and we don't really have time to go back and redo it. So we'll do as much as we can from the beginning, and I'll type up any of my thoughts from the tournaments today or this week.
Hey there, Average Joes. Welcome back to the Eternal Struggle. I am your average host, JayMang. Once again, I'm joined by my taller than average co-host, TallSharkandHandsome, who happens to be in a hallway. How you doing today, Shark?
I'm doing great. I'm bringing Mrs. Shark to a rehearsal that she's in because she's in a straight play, and I've thought, you know what, why waste all this time that I'm just sitting here, actually playing Eternal when I could be just recording my podcast instead, So I plugged in my Google Pixel 3. I've got it working as a hotspot for me, a mobile hotspot, and I'm at the college campus on my shitty old laptop. Um,
Well, you still sound fine, so that's all that matters.
Great. Hopefully the connection doesn't, cut out or anything.
Like it
How about
just
you?
did.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, man. I had a pretty good weekend, pretty relaxed. I've been playing a lot of Eternal, actually, and then other than that, just cleaning and getting ready for my vacation next week.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So why don't you tell me about your week in Eternal while we're at it?
All right. My week in Eternal. So what was the last thing that we did together? We went over a whole bunch of different deck lists. Um, my week in Eternal has been spent like for a while. I was trying, drafting. I did a couple of drafts on stream, just on I think on the Friday before the season was over, and I didn't do very well, so I switched over to playing Apex or something. Um, and then Mrs. Shark came home very drunk, and I had to put her to bed, so I had to leave. Um, that was funny on stream. Um, and then so I since the set has reset, or since the season has reset, I've been playing that Stone Scar mid range deck that you so valiantly sold to me, and so I tried it out, and I've been really enjoying it. It's in a pretty good spot in the meta.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
How about you? What's your week been?
So I believe that I didn't hit Masters until after our episode ended last week. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but I did
Yep.
finish that out. I played an ETS on Saturday and I had a really good time. Although
Cool.
it's very, very difficult to play ETS while also watching a baby. So I don't know how often I'll play ETS.
Mm,
Um, Mostly just because it's so much easier to play like ladder when there's a baby involved, but like playing in
that's
the
true.
ETS requires like a certain amount of time to be focused, and it's not very easy for me. I get distracted really easily, so like it wasn't very easy to play, but I still had a really good time. And then on top of that, so Saturday was the first of the month, so ladder reset happened. I didn't really try very hard after I hit Masters last month to do much other than try out some like memes and stuff. So I tried out a bunch of even-handed golem decks to see if I liked any of them. Um, Saturday, Manus dropped a new article about rats, and I gotta hand it to the guy. He has so much reach in the community because
Yeah.
on Saturday of my ladder matches, um, literally, I'm not even being hyperbolic here. 75% of my matches were against rats, and rats loses really hard to Stone Scar. So I have to give the man a high five slash handshake because he basically just handed me a bunch of ladder matches because everybody was playing rats. And not only
That's
that, but
awesome.
I actually think that the current rats version, the aggro rats, that's very popular, is especially not that great against Stone Scar because they have less removal than the old rats lists.
That's very true. That's very
So
true.
so
Yeah.
like they're just missing like something like four hard removal spells that are pretty important when you're facing down things like Vara and Cha-Cha.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
And see,
and
I was
Haunted
playing.
Highwayman, like, or sorry, not Vicious Highwayman. Like,
Yeah.
the thing is that Stone Scar just does so many things that are really good against rats. Plus, you're a boar deck.
Oh yeah. And if you go into your market and get that standard and flip it into a giving your unit +4/+2 and
Oh, you're playing
overwhelm,
that
you
version.
just smash, yeah, smash right through. I mean,
Yeah,
I've been digging that version. But when I first started doing my ladder matches after the reset, I was starting off with our brew of the week, which we'll talk about later. But it does not have a great game plan against rats, actually.
it's just not
So
good against aggro in general, and we'll get into that later because I had been playing a handful of games with that deck too. Deck's very fun, but it just folds to aggro really hard.
yeah, for sure.
So real quick to talk to everybody about our topics of the week. So this week we're actually our first two topics are going to be about the two events that were this weekend. So the ECQ Showdown we'll cover first, and then we're going to move into the ETS that was this week that I played in. And then the last topic we're going to talk about is actually we're going to rehash a topic that we had, I think, a few months ago about card evaluation techniques, mostly because things like topics like this are really hard to articulate without like having some sort of reference. And I actually came across a podcast that had Marshall Sutcliffe of Limited Resources, which is a Magic the Gathering podcast fame, and he brought up a handful of techniques that they have discussed on their cast, and I want to just quickly go over them, give a basic rundown, and then if anybody's interested in learning more about these types of evaluation techniques, I would strongly recommend going and finding the episodes of Limited Resources where they cover these techniques. So moving on to our only topic that we are having today because of our technical difficulties is card evaluation techniques as coined by Marshall Sutcliffe of Limited Resources, which is a Magic the Gathering podcast that's pretty popular. It's about drafting in Magic the Gathering, but they bring up over the course of various episodes a handful of different card evaluation techniques, which it's not very easy to articulate these without somebody else saying it. So I wanted to rehash this topic, even though we've already covered it before, because I think that Marshall Sutcliffe and his guests slash co-hosts have done a really good job kind of putting these terms into a basket that make it a lot easier to explain some of the techniques that we tried to explain but probably did a really poor job of. So I just wanted to say, obviously, I don't expect Marshall to ever hear this, or even LSV, who I know has been involved with some of these, since LSV is actually Marshall Sutcliffe's co-host on Limited Resources. But I wanted to thank them. I don't want to take any spotlight away from them because these are definitely things that some of these things are terms that they coined. But I wanted to bring it to all of your attention because I know that a lot of you either A, don't listen to Limited Resources, or B, aren't Magic the Gathering players. Yeah. So let's move on to the first technique, which is called best case scenario mentality. It's not really a technique. It's more of a state of mind that a lot of players get into when they look at a card for the first time or in a given situation. And it's very common for card game players to only think about the best situation for a given card. And an example I would like to use here is Sabu, or Tazbu, who is from the most recent set. And he is the 5/5 Deadly Warp, 5 Shadow Influence, 5 cost. That says whenever another unit of yours dies, you lose a life and you draw a card.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people will first evaluate that card and be like, "Oh, I'm going to get so much value off of my other cards by playing this card." And I'm not saying, like, don't take what I'm saying as oh, this card is bad, because I actually think Tazbu is a pretty good card. But a lot of the time, people don't think about the situations where their Tazbu just gets annihilated or removed, and So you played a 5 cost unit that you didn't get any immediate impact on board, and it got answered by a 2 cost spell. So like a lot of the times people don't think about that situation where you play this card, or they're like, oh, I'm going to warp this card off the top every time. I'm going to have a board full of stuff, and my opponent's going to be at a low enough life that they have to chump block or they have to block things and make trades, and I'm going to draw a bunch of cards. Like that type of is what we're trying to say when it comes to best case scenario mentality.
Yeah. And I know that I'm pretty guilty of this whenever I'm drafting. I'm like, okay, here's my first pick. I'm like, oh, this would go really great with my first pick. Oh, this would also go really great with my first pick. And then, like, by the time the draft is done, like, we got all these cards that go really well with this card that I'm never going to see.
Yeah, exactly. So when you're looking at these cards, and especially like this happens more often in like drafts, since I mean this comes from Limited Resources, which is a draft podcast. Um, you've got to think about every situation, not necessarily just where this card is best.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. So why don't you move on to our next one?
Okay, so the next one is called results oriented thinking. We've kind of covered this before, but just to reiterate, because a card does really well in like one situation for you, you can't ignore all the other situations in which it's terrible. Like if you were to draft the card detain, the 1 cost fast spell that says target unit gets -6/-0 until no turn. Sure, it's a cute spell. You can use your that one spell to sometimes maybe not trade your unit for their unit. Maybe one time you blew out somebody who's like a really popular streamer, and or probably even me. You blew me out, and that doesn't mean the card is good. It means you got that one situation where it's really really good. And in a lot of other situations, it's just really not. I mean, if you use it and you're just trying to save yourself from dying, it doesn't save you the next turn. It doesn't actually kill the unit. It just doesn't do very much.
Yeah, a lot of people tend to play. They'll try out or test out a card or a group of cards, and then they'll play like 3 games. And in the one game where you happen to see that card, it does really well for you, and then you're like, oh, this card must be nuts. I am very guilty of this. I have done this a lot, and I know that it's something that I need to work on, because very often I'll test a card and be like, this card is insane. Like, it is so good. The one time I saw it, I used it and I won the game because of it. It's just not like it kind of goes hand in hand with the best case scenario mentality, except for this. You're introducing confirmation bias.
Right. And while results are important, you want more than one result. Like you don't want to think like, oh man, that one time when I blew out that guy, that was great. But what about the other times when you had that 5 influence costing card and you were never able to cast it because you're playing a 4 color deck or something, like that kind of.
Yeah, statistical significance usually involves at least like 30 data points where you're in a situation where you have this card in your hand, and that's like on the low end of things. So it's best to not let the 1 or 2 situations where it was a blowout control how you truly feel about a card existing in your deck.
Right.
All right.
What's the next one?
So the next one is setup costs. So this is what you need to do to make a card good. So there are cards, well, a lot of cards require some amount of setup to make them be either effective or very, very effective or useful at all. So this is like another factor that you need to include when you're evaluating a card. So a good example would be like Pyre Elemental. Pyre Elemental is a very good card, but you do need to have some number of spells in your deck to be able to enable it. Because it really isn't like super great when you don't play your spell to reduce its cost. Because without that spell, your Pyre Elemental is a 6 cost 4/3 with charge. Like that's not a very good stat line, but 2 cost
Another
4/3 with charge.
Yeah, that's really good. And another example would be the entirety of Omens of the Past. All the life steal stuff. Whenever if you're drafting with life steal, you need both the cards that have life that gain you life and the cards that are payoff.
Oh yeah, the Life Force decks.
Yeah, so if you get those payoff cards, like if you get a Katra and you're like, yeah, this thing's gonna be great with all these units that I have, but then you don't ever gain any life, Katra's just a 4 cost 3/3. Like
Hmm.
it's not super good.
Yeah, so it's very, very important to consider how you have to build around that card and whether or not that dilutes everything else that you're trying to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm. So next we're going to talk about opportunity cost, which is the what Marshall had said is the quote unquote real cost of a card. So when your card does something, including the fact that you use the card in the process. So um, going back to a card that we had just used a little bit ago, detain is you may be able to reduce the damage of a unit for the turn, but you're also using a card slash draw step in the process. So the cost of the card isn't just one and having a justice influence. It's also a card. So
Yeah.
using a card in the process, like um, your opportunity cost is like how often is this detain going to replace itself essentially. So you have to be
Uh,
in a situation where you're detaining a unit, you're blocking that unit, and then you're killing that unit.
yeah, so I think a good way for people to understand this would be, when someone attacks you and you dual block, and then they use one spell to kill both of your units, they're 2 for 1ing you.
Hmm.
They're 2 for 1ing you. If you are to use detain to not take a little bit of damage and not kill their unit, you are 0 for 1ing yourself. You are not doing anything. You're taking a little bit less damage, but it costs you an entire card, and it's
Hmm.
not costing your opponent a card at all.
Yeah, exactly. So we always have to keep in mind that unless the card like basically makes you draw cards. So for instance, levitate has a very low opportunity cost. Its opportunity cost is 1 power and
Yep.
having a unit on board.
Yes,
So
because you draw the card, which replaces the card that you just used to draw that card.
exactly. So your opportunity cost is very low. So when you're like evaluating the card, you ask yourself, what's the opportunity cost of this card? It's not much because you're replacing it when you actually get to use the card. Especially because of the way that cards work in Eternal. Everything on the card resolves, even if the target becomes invalidated. So, for instance, you play levitate on a unit, and then your opponent kills it in response. You still get to draw a card. Now, that unit doesn't gain flying until end of turn because it's no longer a valid target. In the same way that when you mirror image something and it gets removed in response, you don't actually get a copy of the unit because the unit's dead.
Yeah, the unit's gone.
Mm,
Yeah, but that totally makes sense. Yep.
yeah. All right. So the
Okay.
last theory is called quadrant theory, and I feel like I need to go back and find who it was that originally coined this term because this was actually a guest on Limited Resources, and I feel like I should give them credit because this is a really like interesting way to put card evaluation
Yeah.
because like this is not something that like everybody thinks of to articulate when they're trying to express how you evaluate a card, and that is
Well, wait,
determining.
wait. How about you go and Google the guy? You go Google the guy, and I'll go through the quadrant theory.
Okay, okay.
All right, you do that. So quadrant theory is a way of evaluating a card at multiple different points in the game. So you want to. There's four different points. It's when you're ahead on board, when you're behind on board, when you're at parity, which means when your boards are equal, or when you are building a board. So in the early game, so you want to evaluate, is detain going to be very good when you're ahead? It makes your opponent's your opponent's unit get -6 -0 until the turn, and it costs you a card. Doesn't seem like it's going to be really that great. When you're behind, it's going to cost you a card. It's going to save you for maybe one turn, and then next turn you're going to die. Doesn't seem that great. When you're even, when you're at parity, you can swing in, and if it's a big huge attack and they've got a big huge block, and then you take that one unit and detain. It can set you up so that you're a little bit heavier on the board than they are now. But they get to choose blockers, so you may have to sacrifice some units for that. So that's a point where it might be maybe good. And when you're building a board, detain is kind of useless because you don't have the units. You're not really doing what detain is used for. So You can see there that Detain is pretty bad in 3 of the 4 areas.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think you can apply this to just about any card. I think a good card to use this with is Defiance. I know that I've been complaining about it. Well, okay, actually, that got cut from the episode, but I was complaining about Defiance at one part in the episode. But when you're ahead, Defiance doesn't do a whole lot unless like they're attacking you with something like a Varo, which is, you know, a situation, but that doesn't. So like it doesn't do a whole lot when you're ahead because your opponent's probably playing defense, but when you're behind, it does a whole lot. When you're at parity, it also does a lot because your opponent at parity may be swinging into you and trying to break that parity with maybe combat tricks or something. And then when you're building a board, it can help you gain that board advantage if they swing into you. They swing into you, you play Defiance, you remove their creature, or I'm sorry, their unit. So like maybe on paper, some of these cards like may not seem like super great, but in practice, you know, things can change.
Yeah, and in the quadrant theory, you know, for example, Defiance is great in 3 out of the 4 of the different quadrants. So you can kind of tell how good a card is by how good it is in those 4 different quadrants. And again, it's when you're ahead, when you're behind, when you're at parity, and when you're building a board.
Yeah, and then this theory was brought to light by Brian Wong, who is a friend of Marshall Sutcliffe.
Good job, Brian.
So very big thanks to Brian and a big thanks to Marshall for bringing these things up. He was recently on Humans of Magic, which I know that I have brought up Humans of Magic before, but I find it really fascinating to hear about these Magic personalities that I like follow and their lives outside of Magic and in Magic as well. So unfortunately, because we had lost all that all of our talking about all those deck lists, short episodes already moving into the average brew of the week, which is a really neat brew by our friend Zyrith.
Yes, Zyrith. He posted this in my my Discord channel when I was looking for just something else, something to play. It's Argentport, as we've coined it, Argentport Big Mid. Because it's kind of a mid-range deck. It's got a bunch of removal. It's got Icaria. It's got Lost Scroll, both ramp cards. Valkyrie Enforcer, Stone Powder Alchemist, Reclaim is kind of like the mid-range stuff. And then it's got Makto, Sadidi, and Svetya the Merciful Oreen. So it's trying to get ramp up into that 8 cost to make all of your units just huge, except for Vara. But even then, Vara is good enough on her own.
Yeah, I think a very accurate description would be AP ramp. It has a lot of ramp in it.
Yeah.
But the Svetya is like, this list has been very fun. I've very much enjoyed it. Struggles a little bit with aggro, but it looks like that he has made some changes to the list to try and accommodate for that. I know that the market has gone through a pretty large overhaul, and then it's got the one harsh rule in the market, and generally decks like this really only need to land that one harsh rule.
Yeah, the deck used to have 4 Martyr's Chains main instead of 4 Svetya, and I think Svetya is the better choice for this deck.
Mm-hmm.
Just making your Maktos plus, you know, making them 11/11 flying Aegis is huge with Revenge.
Yeah, I actually think some of the bigger thing, like giving the Alchemists and the Smugglers that extra boost for the life steal towards the end of the game is like very big as well. Plus they have Aegis. Deck's really fun. I highly recommend that people go and check it out if you happen to have these cards already crafted. Very fun deck. Hopefully you don't see too much aggro, because it does seem to struggle a little bit with aggro, but this definitely goes way bigger than a lot of the other mid-range and control decks in the format.
Yeah, for sure. It does have a little bit of trouble. Well, I guess it did when I was playing Martyr Chains, but it does have a little bit of trouble with the Rats deck, which I saw 3 out of my 4 games that I was playing. So I ended up hanging this up and playing the Stone Scar deck and just Whomping Face. So
Yep, Stone Scar is quite good.
yes. All right. So Jay, why don't you tell us about your brewski of the week?
So this week I brought a type of beer that I don't drink very often. It is a blackberry tart ale by one of my favorite breweries that I've brought up here a lot, Mad Tree Shade. I'm fairly certain that I have not had one of these on the stream or the podcast before, because I'm pretty sure this is the second one out of the six pack. That tells you how much I like it. It's not that great, but as far as a non IPA goes, it's still pretty good. It's kind of weird because it has sea salt in it, and you can taste the sea salt a lot. Like it is very
Oh,
salty.
interesting.
Yeah, it's very
Weird,
very
very tart,
salty, and very tart. It's not bad. I think this would
salty.
be better like if I was at a pool during the summer. Like this definitely
Okay.
feels like that type of beer, like a shandy, like something that you want to drink during
Yeah,
hot weather.
that
Um,
makes sense.
otherwise, like I mean, like tonight I was in the mood for one, so like I'm enjoying it now. Also, you may have heard me burp a couple times during the parts that survived recording, and that's because this stuff is bubbly as shit. Very good
Yeah.
though, very good.
So I'm not sure how much of the recording from before made it. Maybe it was just up until we said the word flame stoker from there. But if that still exists, then you may have already heard me say this. But I'm actually on a college campus. I'm at the community college where my fiance, Mrs. Shark, is practicing for a play that she's in. And so I brought her to rehearsal, and I got this whole setup here. But unfortunately, that means I can't have a brewski of the week because this campus does not allow alcohol in the school buildings. So
Fucking
I don't have.
lamos.
I know I don't have a brewski of the week, but maybe later I'll do the write up for it, and I'll just type it all in there, and you guys can take a look there.
Perfect. And again, guys, sorry. There's just like I there's not enough time for us to go back and record us just talking about deck lists really. Um
Yeah,
I mean
I'll
like I'd
type up my
say that you
thoughts.
missed a
Make it easy.
lot, but like it probably wasn't like too much substance. And then also I do want to mention that we will not have an episode next week either. So sorry that you're getting shafted twice, if you care enough at least. But we're not going to have an episode next week because I will be on vacation and I will not be phoning in for it.
Jaycation.
Yes, Jaycation with the JB.
All right. Yeah, well, and that's not a big deal. I'm going to be typing up my thoughts on the lists. I'll type up what I can remember of your thoughts on the lists, and that'll give you some extra content in that direction since this episode's going to be so short. So give us send us some feedback if you think, if you like this format where we just type up the information about the deck list and then we talk about what we want to talk about. Cool. Maybe we'll start doing that. It'll save us some time when we record. And if you prefer having us talk it through, if you like the longer podcast, let us know that too. That way we know how to move forward and what you guys like.
Yeah. So where can they find you, Shark?
All right. You guys can find me best in Discord. As you can kind of tell, I'm in a Discord call right now with Jay, as I always am. But on Discord, Jay will post a link to it. You guys are welcome to join my Discord. We've had a few people joining already. On Twitch, I am TallSharkandHandsome. On Eternal, I'm TallSharkandHandsome plus 4960. On Reddit, I'm TallSharkandHandsome. And on Twitter, I am at Shark and Tall because TallSharkandHandsome was too big. Giggity. How about you, Jay?
You can also find me on Discord and Shark or Bassoon Buffoon's Discords, where I am quite active. My Twitch is JayOSU, where I tend to stream about once a week. Um, I've been doing a lot more Eternal content, but I am buying back into Magic Online Legacy here soon and maybe Vintage. So I'll probably also be playing Vintage and Legacy. You can find me on Eternal, JayMang plus 8035.
Yeah.
Reddit, JayOSU. And then Twitter is at JayOSU, where I never, ever, ever tweet. So thanks for joining us, guys, for a very, very short episode 16, not by our own choice. Sorry again that the episode probably is not going to be nearly, not that the episodes were that quality before, but like it's probably not going to live up to the quality that you all know and love from us. Because there may be some really weird there may be some really weird cuts in there. Obviously you'll have known by now if you're still listening. But other than that, like Shark said, please let us know any thoughts or suggestions you may have, topic suggestions that you want to hear us talk about, and keep coming back. We appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yep, stay average.